August is often a tricky month for weed gardeners. Everything's coming to maturity, lots of flowers, fruit and veg. So I like to have a set routine of jobs that I do to keep plants growing right through the summer. So what is a cutting? Well, a cutting is a piece of plant that you remove and then encourage to form roots of its own. And a softwood cutting is just that. It's a cutting taken during the height of the growing season when the plant tissue is soft to the touch and malleable. When we get on into autumn and winter, then you can take hardwood cuttings, particularly of hardy deciduous plants that lose their leaves, but they are nothing more than hard sticks and they will root. Softwood cuttings though, anytime really between April and September, these fleshy shoot tips that with a bit of care and attention, I'll show you exactly what, will form roots of their own and therefore new plants. It's a wonderful way of saving money, of making more plants for very little cost and, to be honest, not much effort. Cuttings are always taken from perennial plants, plants that will keep on growing indefinitely for several years. There wouldn't be much point in taking an annual cutting, would there? You grow annuals from seed for one season and then they die. Perennials though, a lot of them, you can keep going and creating new plants from cuttings. Plants get tired, they get old. I've got one or two older ones in here because I really rather like them when they get statuesque like that. But those shoot tips on that pelargonium there, which is an almost tree-like one, they could be taken off as cuttings, and I grew in fact these plants from cuttings. But I quite like one or two that are tall and leggy like that. I'm looking at this plant in front of me here. This is a pelargonium called Attar of Roses. It's one of the scented leaved varieties. Not all of them are. A lot of them are just grown for flower, like these zonal pelargoniums. But this one, if you rub the leaf, it does smell of roses. It really does, or rosy perfume. So what I'm going to do is just look at this and take off some shoot tips which I know I can make into new plants. So let me show you what you're looking for. You're looking for stems of reasonable thickness and also a few joints on them. So your cutting when you finish will be between 3 and 4 inches long. That's between 8 and 10 centimetres. So I'm looking for shoots that will give me that. Make your cut just above that leaf there. If I made it there, that would die back. I don't want that. So I'm going to cut just above that leaf joint there. So that shoot there will grow out. So there is my cutting. In fact, look at that. I can get 2 off that if I'm crafty. So what I want is 3 or 4 to fill a single pot full out there. Right, they're ready to prepare. I'm going to prepare my pot of compost. Plenty of drainage holes in the bottom. Don't need any crock in there. Fill it up with seed and cuttings compost. Now the thing about seed and cuttings compost is it's well drained and it doesn't have too much in the way of nutrients in it. These plants need moisture to draw the roots out rather than any food at the moment. So there we are. There's my pot, ready to take them. I need now to prepare them, and that means getting them to the right length with the right amount of leaf left on and the right amount of leaf taken off. Now this cutting here, I can get 2 for the price of 1 because there's a big leaf joint there at the bottom and 2 shoots coming out of it. The thing about leaf joints is that is where there is the most capability of rooting in terms of hormones within the stem on the plant, more so than between 2 joints. If you take a cutting and you make it internodally, these are called nodes, the joints on the stem, take an internodal cutting, and the propensity is for that piece to rot up to there. So if you always make your cutting just below a leaf joint, that cutting will stand much more chance of rooting well. Take the flowers off, and on pelargoniums they break off quite neatly like that. There's another one up here. Just snap them and you'll find they come off quite cleanly. If they don't, on other plants you can cut them off with your knife. Then it's a matter of removing some of the lower leaves. On plants where they won't pull off easily, you can cut them off as close to the stem as possible. But pelargonium leaves, rather like those flowers, will just pop off if you pull them. Just a couple more to come off. It's a balancing act, this, really. You need to leave enough leaves on the top to photosynthesize, to make food to pass down the stem to encourage rooting. But not so many that they lose moisture faster than they can take it up. That's about right. And now I'm ready to turn that into 2 cuttings. I can actually make just 1 cut here. There, and then I'm going to separate the 2. So they've both got a bit of leaf joint below them, which means they've both got the potential to root. It's important that your knife is really sharp, so it cuts cleanly through just below those leaf joints rather than crushing them, because if they're crushed they'll rot. There we are, 4 cuttings, potentially 4 new plants. I'm going to insert them right around the edge because that's where drainage is fiercest. Slide the dibber in, and then as the dibber comes out, slide the cutting in so that it sits with the leaves just above the surface of the compost. And I'll get all 4 cuttings here around the edge of this pot. 1 out, 1 in. Water it in. These are hair-relieved plants, pelargoniums, particularly the scented leaved ones. For plants that aren't hairy, you can put a polythene bag over the top to keep the moisture in. Do that with pelargoniums though, and they tend to rot. So what to do with this now is to water it and put it on a windowsill in reasonably bright light but not scorching sunshine. Keep that compost damp and you'll find that soon, in a few weeks' time, they'll start to grow away. And that way, you know you've got new plants, and you can tap them out once growth has started and pot them up individually. The funny thing about hanging baskets is they divide the population. You either love them or loathe them, but I'm going to show you one today that I hope everybody could love. Traditional and yet tasteful. And as with all hanging baskets, make sure they're sturdy. This one's made from really strong wire and steel. It's not going to buckle. I like my hanging baskets to be well furnished around the sides as well, otherwise you end up looking at a load of wire and coir rather than plants. So I've cut holes every other gap. Just make a hole as near a circle as I possibly can. Going around there. There we are, that bit's gone. Now, a lot of them are wobbly, and this one also I want to be able to get up inside it to plant these gaps. So get a bucket or a large flower pot. And instant stability. You can now see what you're doing, and it's much more accessible in terms of planting around the sides. When it comes to compost, peat-free, multi-purpose is absolutely fine. But there's also trough and basket compost, specially formulated. Ladle it into the basket just as high up as the bottom of these holes. Trailing plants are the best, and ivy is so versatile, apart from the fact it's a perennial and just keeps on going and going and going right the way through the year on into the next, and you can snip it back when it gets too big. Good variegated foliage on this one, silver variegated. And this little blue-purple flower called Bacopa. You can get it in blue, purple, white. Don't try to push the foliage through the hole. Do it the other way around. Squeeze the root ball, and the important thing is you can see look at that. Make sure all your root balls are really soggy, and then that just neatly pulls through there, and you can bed it into the compost. Now, don't throw away these, because they can sit inside now just to stop the compost from falling through the hole, because the plants themselves didn't fill the entire gap. We thought of throwing those away, didn't we? Yeah. Fill up with compost now. Now, the biggest problem facing hanging baskets is drying out. They're hanging up in mid-air with the sun beating down on them. This helps. These are water storing crystals. You can add them to the compost, sprinkle them in, work them in with your fingers, and once water hits that, they expand and they become a kind of gel, and they just stop the hanging basket drying out quite so quickly as it otherwise would. That should be about enough. This is Diasia, a lovely, useful trailer. I'm just going to space these out so I can see what will go in between them. I've got a pot full of lobelia. It's not going to be totally symmetrical, this. That in there. This one used to be called Petunia Million Bells, and they've rechristened it Calibrachoa. Sounds like a throat complaint. Still quite pretty. The great thing about petunias in general, and these miniature ones, Calibrachoa, is they will flower right the way through the summer. They just keep on going. I'm going to get a couple of pinks in here. Oh, always reminded me of my childhood, the smell of garden pinks. That one will sit in there. That's more upright, but we'll see why in a minute. Got another one to go in this side over here. Another pink Mountain Frost Ruby Snow. Where did we get these names? And this is Petunia Funhouse Painted Love Purple. Snappy title, eh? But what a plant. Glorious combination of purple, white and lilac. And I'm going to feed in with a little bit more compost around it. You don't want air pockets. They always look a little bit sort of stuffed when you've just done them. But once they've been hung up, watered, in a couple of days, they'll have fluffed themselves up. You know how irritating it is when you want a handful of herbs from the garden and they're right down the end and it's pouring down. Hanging basket, outside the back door, herbs to hand. Holes made, in the edge, creeping thymes. Oh, wonderfully aromatic. Same rules apply, poke them through from the outside. People get very timid about plants, but if you know which bits are tender and which bits you will damage and which bits you won't, you can do things like that and it won't matter at all. This is a lovely variegated sage. Sage is normally a sort of sage green, that dusky grey green. This is one called Icterino, which has got leaves that are variegated. And a hugely useful herb, chives, the little thin-leaved onion, which we love on buttered new potatoes. And that will squeeze in round here. A bit of a treat to go down that side there. An alpine strawberry. Now, alpine strawberries are tiny. They're never going to give you 5 bowlfuls a week, but what they do in a hanging basket, you can see them starting here. When you're walking past, you can just pinch one and pop it in your mouth. And they do taste divine when they're sun warmed. This is parsley. As a cry goes up in our kitchen, more regularly than you would think, from Mrs. T. Have we got any parsley? I mean, I've told her where it is. I'm not going there. Now, rosemary is a very upright shrub, but this is a trailing variety. And in the middle, for a bit of fragrance, French lavender. Oh, straight to Provence. It's got to expand itself now, sort of breathe in, fluff up its feathers, have a watering, and then it'll stand up. And there we are, outside your back door, herbs at your fingertips, whatever the weather. Now, if you've always avoided hanging baskets for the simple reason that you're out all day at work in scorching heat, when you come home they've dried to a crisp, this is the hanging basket for you. The answer is these succulents. They have their own inbuilt supply of water in these fleshy leaves, and they can go without water for days. Traily ones round the edge, and then my big showstoppers right in the middle. And then I reckon I can get these 2 in the centre, which just gives me that much more spectacle. And succulents do flower. This one's about to come, this echeveria. Lovely thing. There you are then. The most vital thing for all of them is watering. Now, when it comes to timing, do it in the morning when you get up, and on days like this, clear blue sky, sun baking down, do it in the evening as well. This is my wisteria. It flowered massively this spring, absolutely covered in those glorious lilac-coloured flower trails, and the scent was amazing. The flowers have faded, the foliage has come, and look at it. Oh, Alan, you'll say, it's all yellow. Why is it yellow? Well, it's been a very hot summer, and the main problem here is I am on very chalky soil. It's very alkaline, and chlorosis, the lack of green material in leaves, tends to come when they're lacking in nutrients. As long as I get liquid feed down to its roots, it will be fine. But the other thing that wisteria needs to encourage it to flower is pruning twice a year, in January and then in the summer. These long shoots, if you want to extend the territory of your plant, tie them in to supports on the wall. If you don't, and this is a freestanding wisteria, I don't need it to grow any wider, but I do want to encourage it to flower in this sort of shape next year. So these long shoots like this, shorten them. You can leave a foot at that end of new growth where it came out of the more mature stem, but cut back to 12 inches or so, 30 centimetres, just above a bud. So that has got about a foot, 30 centimetres of new growth left. and that will be shortened again in January to about finger length. What you may also find is that your wisteria produces seed pods. They look a bit like runner beans. Don't eat them. You may also be tempted to think, oh, I can dry and save these seeds and grow my own wisteria. Well, with a wisteria, this is too much of a gamble. A lot of wisterias are flower shy, they don't flower particularly well. When you're sowing seeds from them, there'll be a lot of variation, and that means you may not end up with a plant which is a free flowering spectacular one, and you'll have waited an awful long time, having raised it from seed, to discover that. So the seed pods, snip them off. As well as seed pods, keep a lookout for branches that have died. There's one in here, and it's easy to see. Take out any stems like that that are clearly dead, and you'll notice that the wood is quite brittle. Be careful about it, reduce it rather than hammer it right the way down. Don't cut it back to stumps, but you can certainly tidy it up a bit and take out one or two of the older stems that really look ill. And that way you can end up with a wisteria which is renewing itself a bit every year, flowering well, but still has a kind of venerable quality to it. This is one of my favourite climbing roses. This is Alistair Stella Grey, and I trained it up an old cherry tree that was beginning to die, and I thought, I'm not going to give up on the cherry tree, I'll use it as a plant support. This is its second flush. It flowered massively earlier on in the year, in about June, with these wonderful flowers of almost primrose yellow. The second flush, as you can see, is rather paler, and if you look at it, you'll see there are odd shoots on it, like flowered earlier on in the year, this first flush of flower, but now this stem is not producing anymore. I can see that the problem lies up here. There's been a break in the stem here, and it's dying back all the way up to this shoot here, which is alive. So I'm going to cut it back as far up as that. So that's all the dead wood gone, and then that green shoot will carry on growing. When it comes to training climbers against walls and fences, you need various bits of kit at your disposal. The longest lasting one are horizontal wires affixed to the wall or the fence. You can see I've done it here on my house wall. There's a little clamp at the end there. The wire is tensioned and then the clamp tightens, so I've got really tight wires at about 45 centimetre, 18-inch intervals up the wall. This is a rather more elaborate way. So the vine eye, as we call it, goes into the wall with a plug on its end so it gets tension and bite. That hooks onto there, having first fastened your wire to this end. And by twisting this, you can tighten the wire to get it really taut, and they will last for several years. A more temporary way of doing it, these sort of horticultural cable ties can be nailed to the wall through there, and then you put your plant stem here, put that round it, pull it through, and it's secured and not strangled. But for me, the stout wire between those vine eyes tightened and then left in place to do your final ties with this jute twine. That's my preferred method, but you do need to fasten it on the proper way. This is one of my favourite wall shrubs. This is a form of indigo. It's called Indigofera pendula because its flowers are pendulous. This is a stem that's got away, it's rather wayward, but I need to strap it into the wall, and I'm going to use this jute twine, which I'm going to take around that taut wire which I've already fastened to this wall. I'm taking the twine up and around it, so you can see it's wrapped once round, then crossing it and bringing the stem in. And what I've done here is made sure that I've got cushioning around that plant. It's not too tight, but it's never going to chafe on that wire. And now I've got a plant which is much happier and wall which is much better covered. And if the plant's happy, I'm happy. Young climbers and wall plants find themselves in one of the most challenging parts of the garden. Against a wall or a fence, they're in what we call a rain shadow area. Rain tends not to fall much, really close to a vertical surface. It falls away from it. It also means that, particularly in the case of brick and stone, moisture is sucked out of the adjacent soil. So when they first go in, you've got to be really helpful and make sure they're thoroughly watered regularly, particularly through that first season. Every few days, if rain isn't forthcoming, then get out there and put loads of water on it. This is a young rose called Albertine. It's getting away, but once I've watered it well like this, I can reduce the need to water by covering the already damp soil with a mulch, a thick layer of ornamental bark chipping, say 2 inches thick. That will stop the sun from burning the soil and causing the water to evaporate. Strawberry plants are very useful, very thoughtful, because as well as growing into plants themselves, they decide they'll put out youngsters, and they put them out on the end of these long stems that we call runners, and each of these little plants will make a new one. And the easiest way to do it is to get a few pots, peg them into some compost, keep them damp, and then eventually you can sever the umbilical cord and have a new plant in a pot ready to plant out and give you a crop next year. Neat, eh? Thank you, strawberry plant. Very thoughtful. Instead of cutting back the runners that come off the parent plant, let them develop. Fill 3 pots with multi-purpose compost. Then use a trowel to sink them into the ground alongside the parent plant. Then pin each little plant at the end of a runner into one of the pots. You can cut off any of the runner that stretches out beyond the little plant you're choosing. Then you end up with 3 baby plants still connected to mum by the botanical equivalent of an umbilical cord. The important thing is to keep them moist in their pots, and in about a month's time they'll have rooted down into that compost. You can sever them from mum, take them out, keep them growing, just grow them on for a bit, and then you can plant them out to make a new strawberry bed in autumn, all for nothing. So what makes a showstopper? Well, quite simply, it's a plant that can stop you in your tracks when you walk out into the garden. There's just 3 plants in my own garden that I really do consider to be showstoppers. The first one you certainly won't argue with. This is the hydrangea called Annabelle. We prune it down to a few sticks in winter, and up it comes in spring with these enormous great white flower heads, so massive they need support, otherwise the plants flop open. But Annabelle, for me, give her a can of water when she looks a bit wilty, this is the result you get. I have 2 borders packed with agapanthus. I dug it up and divided it because it was getting overcrowded and flowering was falling off, and I thought, well, it won't do much this coming year. Oh boy, hasn't it just? 2 beds here, raised beds, full of Agapanthus Catharina. And then there are the Japanese maples. Maybe not at their most spectacular show stopping at this time of year, but they certainly are when they come into leaf in spring, either bright green, orange tinged, or even dark purple. They look great during the summer, small, statuesque trees, good for a modest sized garden. And then come the autumn, you get glorious autumn colour in shades of yellow, orange and scarlet. They really do pay rent for keep all the way through the year. And an honourable mention for the lilies I planted way back in spring. Do you remember? Well, it's always nice to be proved right, isn't it? And at the moment they look glorious and the fragrance is divine. I'm using 3 wooden planters of different sizes and slightly different heights. I've painted them a sort of soft sage green to complement my planting scheme. I've lined each one to protect them, and I'm arranging them in a corner pattern. And I'm filling each one with multi-purpose, peat-free tub and basket compost. This compost is great because it's designed for tubs and containers, which means it's got that little bit more food in to sustain them right the way through the year. When you're filling them up with compost like this, don't fill them too full to start with. Remember, the root balls that go in from the plants you're going to put in will take up space. That's why I've left sort of a couple of inches gap at the top. So what I need to do now is to work out what I'm going to plant where to give myself this kind of wraparound miniature garden. I have a little phrase I use for planting design. It's called the agony and the ecstasy. Hopefully the emphasis on the latter. I like to place them before I plant and place the other containers too, because I can get an idea of how it's going to look, and then it's so much easier to adjust it. As well as creating a pleasing colour scheme, but I'm also looking at structure. I find, for me, if I arrange things in pleasing slopes, ups and downs, but quite gradual, that's what I like. And I'm starting with my biggest plants here at the back and coming down slightly lower as we go to the sides to make something that will cradle my chair. So starting with the largest container and the largest plants, this is about 500 millimetres by 900 millimetres, this planter, just under a square metre. And if I take out the ones there, I can start with the largest. Always a good idea to start with the biggest plant and work down in order of size and scale, because then your main structure is in place. And this euonymus here in this corner is just a green, very good substitute for box. So making sure it's straight. They don't always come straight in their pots, so feel free to straighten them up at planting time. Just bear in mind that all plantings in containers like this are temporary. By that I don't mean a couple of weeks, I mean a year or so. Then they might start outgrowing each other and out-competing one another. Then you can just adjust it. Never be frightened of moving plants. They quite enjoy a holiday every now and again. This next one is Gaura with these lovely butterfly flowers. In fact, this one's called whirling butterflies. It's starting to take the eye downwards. You can say, oh, it's a little bit taller than this, but it's thinner, so it doesn't look as robust. And the contrast of this sturdy cone of evergreen foliage from the euonymus with the feathery light butterfly flowers of Gaura, I quite like the play there and the fact that these blow about in the breeze and this stays static. One group of plants that's really useful in the summer garden are the shrubby salvias. They come in lots of different colours, blues and reds and pinks and whites. This is cool violet, and I love the contrast of the colour with the white of the Gaura. So they're wonderfully aromatic too if you crush the leaves. Really powerful sage scent, and that's what the salvias are. They're sages. Next comes this, a lovely contrasting flower shape. This is the flathead of Achillea. This is a variety called Sassy Summer Lemon. You see why I don't know all these names? They change them every year, but it is lovely, not too tall. With all these plants, I've watered them all thoroughly before I'm planting. Get them really soggy before you plant, and then you can water them again afterwards. If you plant them dry, there's a chance that the root ball might stay dry, and that would never do. Because my chair's going really close to this, I want plants that have fragrance as well. So we've got the sage, and then at the front, a bit of lavender. This is a lovely variegated euphorbia called Ascot Rainbow, and the yellow variegation on the leaf will pick up the yellow of the Achillea. And finally, in the corner, a catmint, another plant with an aroma. Now, if you plant catmint, you probably plant Walker's Low, and then you'll think to yourself, it's not actually that low, is it? It's still quite tall. This is Junior Walker, which is even lower, so that's a perfect plant for a trough. So there's my first one done. Seems to me to be a very good start. For the second container, I'm picking up on the colour of the salvia with this lower growing form of Verbena bonariensis, which is called Lollipop. The lovely thing about this plant, apart from its intrinsic beauty, is that bees and butterflies love it, and they'll pop in while you're sitting here with your morning coffee or your cup of tea or your evening glass, and they'll really enjoy the nectar that this plant produces in abundance. And in the middle, a rounded form, a sphere of that euonymus there, which is called green spire. The great thing about these euonymuses is that they're evergreen. So come the winter, when a lot of the others die down, you can replace the other plants and leave these as the sort of skeleton structure in your garden and plant it up with spring flowering bulbs, winter flowering pansies. So there's a versatility in this kind of container gardening. And sticking with the fragrance, a glorious dianthus here, little pink. I'm tucking two of these down the side of this euonymus, along with a couple of ivies creeping down the side. And finally, on the front here, a lovely hardy geranium, sprawling purple flowers on this one, pale purple, which will complement the others. And I'm just going to stick that right down the front here so it'll spill over the edge and soften the hard lines of this container. I'm quite pleased with the way this is coming together now. This kind of complementary colours coming all the way through, but contrasting textures and flower shapes. It's very interesting noticing things, and when something is as small as this and as intense as this, it makes you look closely and it makes you really appreciate and enjoy the structure, the fragrance and the colour of plants. One plant to go. The tall part of my triangle in this final trough is an allium, an ornamental onion. This one's called Millennium. In front of it, a coreopsis with flowers of pale yellow and mahogany. Bit of ivy trailing down the front. And at the front, two sages, the purple-leaved sage, Salvia officinalis purpurea, which really does pick up the colour of those sage green containers. Our first garden when we got married was 15 feet by 40. I thought that was tiny, but this just goes to show in 1.5 meters that you can make a garden in any space available if you choose the right plants and arrange them well. So now you can see how it all works together. The combinations of colours, the contrasts of textures and forms, and I think quite a sweet little garden in 1.5 meters. You know, however long you've been gardening, and I've been gardening quite a long time, every time you set out on a little project like this, however small, there's always the, can I make this work? Will this be the one that really doesn't look quite right? And then when you get to the end of it, you think, do you know, I'm really rather chuffed with that because it works and it's pleasing. And when I sit down among it with my cup of coffee, it makes me feel good. And that's what gardens should do. You're doing good for wildlife and for nature, but you're also doing good for yourself. And that counts for a lot for me. Cheers. Gardening has changed my life, so let me show you how it can change yours. I'll be posting new videos every week, so subscribe and let's get gardening together.